So we said with St. Augustine, for each person, his cupidity is a storm. You love the ocean of the world, and it will absorb you. It will devour its lovers and not bear them up. The Book of Wisdom says, for the corruptible body is a load upon the soul, and the earthly habitation presseth down the mind that museth upon many things. St. John Chrysostom said, if concupiscence were not a fire, it would not destroy the house. They didn't call him Golden Mouth for nothing. And then there's Psalm 37. There is no health in my flesh because of thy wrath. There is no peace for my bones because of my sins. For my iniquities are gone over my head, and as a heavy burden they are become heavy upon me. My sores are purified and corrupted because of my foolishness. I am become miserable and am bowed down even to the end. I walked sorrowful all the day long, for my loins are filled with illusions, and there is no health in my flesh. I am afflicted and humbled exceedingly. I roared with the groaning of my heart. My heart is troubled, my strength hath left me, and the light of my eyes is not with me. That's one of the penitential psalms, Psalm 37. Concupiscence leaves the soul empty. To obey it is a misfortune. Concupiscence is an evil which tortures the soul by giving it a continual thirst and desire for things of this life, which are incapable of fulfilling or of satisfying it. It becomes the prey of worries, of griefs, of disappointments, of fears, and of much pain. So it causes all of those things. People are unhappy because their worldly desires are not fulfilled. They become angry, and they become unhappy, they become depressed because their worldly desires are not fulfilled, period. So, if their girlfriend tells them to go take a hike or something, well, then they want to kill themselves. And so all of the, when you set up an idol of a worldly thing, whatever it should be, and you're placing all of your happiness in that, you'll become both angry and depressed. Anger and depression are two twin sisters. I think I've said that to you. Because they both have, in a way, the same object. Anger wants to push away an evil. Sadness is to embrace an evil, to have it sit in you. All right. So evil is the object of both of them, and what you're doing about it is the object of both of them. So usually you get angry first, and then you get depressed when you cannot throw off the object of your sadness. All right, so people, when they get divorced and everything, they get angry. Some of them kill their wives and suffocate their children and all sorts of horrid things like that. Like if you're rejecting me, then you all have to die, and if I can't have you, no one will have you, and so they shoot the whole family. It's not uncommon. I mean, it doesn't happen every single day, but I mean, we're not terribly shocked when it happens. But when you have you place all of your hope and your happiness in God, then created things become much less important. They're useful, they're nice, but there's no attachment there. So when human beings let you down, and they always do, and you will let down other people. Don't forget that. Don't think that you're incapable or that you're a Superman and that you'll never let someone down. But when human beings let you down, it's not the end of the world. So if a spouse finds out that his or her spouse is not what he really should be, it's not the end of the world. It's not, well, I have to walk out and find another spouse, or this is all my happiness. Okay, he or she is a human being. So you bear up with things much more easily because a created thing just doesn't have that much interest for you. It's a mild interest. But human beings are fragile things. They're fickle, and especially in that passionate love, that's a very fickle thing because it's based on self-love. The love of concupiscence, that's the lowest form of love, is based on self-love. So whatever your self-love desires today is the object of the passion. And that changes from... And because, with regard to people, marriage partners, etc., it's whoever is the prettiest girl or whoever is the richest man, So you could have... all sorts of feelings of concupiscence towards someone, and then it changes because somebody better comes along very easily. Somebody richer or somebody better looking. Also, we tend to get bored with objects of concupiscence. So if you have chocolate cake every day, like what's for dessert today? Chocolate cake again, for the 365th time. All right? You get bored with it. Your concupiscence needs variety. Variety is the spice of life, as they say. It wants variety. It wants new experiences. See, so if your love is based on concupiscence, which is a form of self-love, you're going to be constantly looking for something else. See, love of concupiscence is loving something for yourself, which is legitimate if it's a thing that you need or want legitimately, like a piece of cake. Usually you don't need it. Usually you want it, all right? But you don't love the cake in itself. You love the cake for what it can do for you. Right? That's the love of concupiscence. Anybody that would love cake in itself would have to be crazy. It's just not the object of loving something in itself. So, but then you have I think I told you the three levels of love is the love of concupiscence. This is Aristotle. And that's legitimate for certain things. And then there's the love of utility. And that's when you walk into a car dealer's. Right, you walk in, you are the most important person when you walk in. They swarm around you, and you start looking at a car, and then they're there they are, can I help you? And if you say, I'm looking for somebody else, or I'm just checking this out, well, then you're dead, and then you're no good. You see, that's love of utility. You're useful to them as a means of making money, and that has its place too. You see, so all business is based on utility. All business, all the relationships in business are based on utility, most of them. That's why business is business. You might be friendly with certain people, but business is business. If I was friendly with the man who was selling us the building, but he was looking for his business and I was looking for mine. So you have both have, that's utility. There's a place for that. right? But when these, you see, then there's the, what's the name of it? That's concupiscence, utility, friendship. That is to love someone for him or herself. You see, that is where you will good to the other person. So ultimately to God. You will the glory of God. But in human affairs, you will the good of the other person, so parents to their children. You see, and that's by its very nature selfless. And the more it's selfless, the stronger it is. Garrigou says, unfortunately, with regard to God, tends to be mixed with self-love. That it weakens love. Self-love weakens that love. But in itself, it's totally selfless. And so it has a perfection. So, a mother will go into a burning building to save her children. So the more in marriage that you have a selfless love, the better that marriage is going to be. And the more selfish it is, the worse it's going to be. It's going to end in divorce, no problem whatsoever. Right? The same is true of the priesthood. You can be, the priest should be totally, 100% given over to the things of God. To the extent that he is selfish, he's going to be worldly. And that's going to weaken his love of God. It's the same thing, same principle. You'll have the divided heart. So the point is that concupiscence brings on worries and griefs and disappointments and fears and pains. If you're on this level, concupiscence causes us to have a constant desire. And we desire what we do not have. $1 million. I don't have it. Be nice to have it. You see, you desire it. Maybe not. I'm just using concrete examples. Thus, concupiscence causes us to be unhappy and poor. Saying, I don't have it. I don't have a yellow Ferrari. I'm unhappy. There's a lot of people that live like that. They have credit cards. They go and spend all kinds of money on their credit cards. They live with 18% interest. That builds up and builds up and builds up. They have thousands of dollars in debt on credit cards because they just love stuff. They go out and buy stuff. They feel unhappy unless they're shopping. For women, shopping is a form of therapy. I don't know if you know that. To go shopping and to buy stuff makes them feel real good. It does. It's, look in windows and isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't that be nice? And I think I need that. And a new pair of shoes. There's 100 million shoes in the closet, but new pair of shoes. It's just that's the way they are. There is a very strong nesting influence in women. So the house and all of those things become more interesting. Let's say there's a nesting influence, and that's good because we need a nest for the children, and the husband too. The husband likes the nest too. See? So everything is willed by God, and no, it's true. Men do not like to come home to a messy house. They like to come home to a very ordered house. And many times a bad housekeeper, like if a woman is a bad housekeeper, that's a source of a lot of conflict in marriage, and I've seen it. where the husband has to come home from work and straighten out the whole house because it's a mess. That leads to a lot of problems because she's not doing her job. Just as if he were not doing his job. Everyone has a job and a function and a purpose, just like a machine, like a clock. Every gear has a purpose, and if it doesn't perform that purpose and function, the whole does not work. Whatever it is. There's a number 1, there's a number 2, there's a number 3, and a number 4 and so forth in any organization. If each one is functioning nicely, the whole thing works nicely. But if there's some sort of disproportion, where there's ambition, or I want to be number 1, or I have to be king of the mountain, then the thing starts falling apart. So there's nothing wrong with being number 2, because the number 2 man is extremely important. You see? And so is number 3 extremely important. See? So that balance in the universe is very, very important. So anyway, concupiscence causes us to be unhappy and poor. Secondly, you desire and you do not have, because concupiscence is insatiable. So it's always, as I said, looking for new experiences, new joys. I have the yellow Ferrari now, but what if I had one of those $500,000 Rolls Royces? That would be even better. And so, then I need a bigger garage because I have the Ferrari and the Rolls Royce, It is insatiable. And the reason for that is that your soul has a tremendous depth that can only be filled in by God. And material things are very impoverished in their ability to fill in your soul. They work for a little bit. You're happy that the Rolls Royce arrived today. Oh, look at that car. Isn't that beautiful? I can't wait to get in it. You see, that lasts about 2 weeks. As I always say, kids on Christmas Day, oh, this great toy, I wanted it so much. Oh, I was hoping for this. A week that it's thrown aside and they don't look at it anymore by New Year's Day. I remember that was true of me. It just it's not interesting anymore. Parents have to put it away. It's insatiable. Thirdly, you desire and you have not, because what you do have is no longer sufficient for you. The thing becomes insipid, that means tasteless for you, and no longer attracts your interest, which is related to what we said. Things just lose interest for you. For you desire and you have not, because at the very moment that a thing which you desire ardently obtains for you a fleeting pleasure, the pleasure disappears quickly. So that's true of sexual things. It's true of gluttony. Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I could eat a horse, all this, and then you eat, and and the thought of food is disgusting. I think I'll vomit, if somebody suggests food. So it comes and goes quickly, And also, in sexual things, a woman can be the object of the most intense desire, and then somebody else comes along and that person is the object of desire. It's a very fleeting thing. You desire and you have not, because the thing that you desire possesses you more than you possess it. So you become a slave to what you desire by concupiscence. It holds on to you and you do not hold it. Often you cannot enjoy the very thing that you desire. It happens. Seven, often you do not use the thing which you have so long desired. That happens too. Thus the miser, though amassing riches, lives a very parsimonious life. It's typical of misers. They have tons of money, but they live like paupers. Because the thought of spending money, their arms become paralyzed. And the thought of taking money out of a wallet and putting it down and spending it. It's practically true. The thought of spending money, or actually putting down money for something, it's just unbearable for them. So they live like paupers. Misers, a true miser does that, where they love not what money can buy, but they love money, which is even worse than loving what money can buy. Just the love of money, holding money. We have money. You see? That's a miser. So he doesn't even, he doesn't enjoy anything. All right. The next point on concupiscence is that punishments, we'll talk about the punishments which are consequent to consenting to concupiscence. The Book of Wisdom says, "By what things a man sinneth, by the same also he is tormented." The man who yields to the impulse of concupiscence finds in the very quenching of his desires the loss of reason, of memory, of the will, of health, of beauty, of reputation, and even life. So in pursuing concupiscence, you are you're receiving your own punishment by the deterioration of all of those things in one form or the other. He finds darkness in them, these objects of concupiscence, a stupor, a slavery, diseases, pains, remorse, despair, a cruel and premature death. Think of Henry VIII, who, as Father Randolph called him, was a rotting mass of syphilis. God's malediction and that of men, and finally hell, which will never be extinguished. On the other hand, there is much merit to be procured by resistance to concupiscence. St. Paul, in the Epistle to the Romans, says that he does not approve of what he does, speaking about the involuntary movements of concupiscence which he endured. Right, now this is a somewhat obscure text that he has. He says, "For that which I work I understand not. For I do not that good which I will, but the evil which I hate that I do. If then I do that which I will not, I consent to the law, that it is good. Now then it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me." It's an obscure text, exactly what he means by that. Remember, St. Peter said that St. Paul is hard to understand. It's in St. Peter's epistle. So it seems that he's referring to movements of concupiscence. He also said, and this is famous, "Unless the greatness of the revelation should exalt me, there was given me a sting of my flesh, an angel of Satan, to buffet me, for which thing thrice I besought the Lord, that it might depart from me. And he said to me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for power is made perfect in infirmity. Gladly, therefore, will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may dwell in me." St. Gregory the Great said, "Weakness is the best guardian of virtue, either against pressures or temptations, and it happens with a certain moderation, as when one of the pious faithful is elevated interiorly to the highest virtues, but who is exteriorly tempted, incurs neither a fall into despair nor of elation. Thus we know in success what we have received from God, and in failing we know what we are." So if you resist the sin, it's by the grace of God. If you fall into it, it's by your own powers and weaknesses and failures. St. Bernard of Clairvaux says, "God permits that concupiscence still live in us, and that it afflict us deeply, in order to humiliate us, and in order that by feeling that which His grace furnishes us, we be drawn to ask for it without ceasing. It is in this way that God acts with us in the case of light faults. We are never freed from them entirely, in order that we learn that if we are not able to avoid all venial sins, it is not at all certain that through our own strength we avoid mortal sins, and in order that we place all our cares in vigilance and fear, all our worries in not losing grace, the necessity of which we recognize very well by a continual experience." So the only thing to worry about is losing grace. St. Bernard of Clairvaux said, "You see how the weakness of the flesh increases the strength of the spirit and gives to it courage and strength. And what is surprising if you should find yourself stronger when your most mortal enemy is weakened? Unless you most foolishly regard as your friend this flesh, which does not cease to conspire and revolt against the Spirit." And St. Lawrence Justiniani said, "All discipline of Christian profession does not consist in performing miracles, or in predicting the future, or in speaking eloquently, or in having a deep knowledge of the Scriptures, but it consists in combating and repressing one's concupiscences." Now, what are the means of overcoming concupiscence? The first is by the fear of God. Fear of God is primarily our own fear of offending Him. That's the timor domini. A fear of offending Him, knowing our own weakness and our own ability to offend Him. That's that's what fear of the Lord is. So the Psalm says, "Pierce thou my flesh with thy fear, for I am afraid of thy judgments." So it also involves a fear of the punishments of God. But when it is animated by charity, it is primarily the fear of offending God. It is a fear of your own weakness. Second, by walking in the Spirit. St. Paul says, "I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh." It's Galatians chapter 5, verse 16. And St. Augustine says this, "You are engaged in a war not only against the suggestions of the devil, but most of all against yourselves." But you might say, how are we at war with ourselves? Yes, against your old concupiscences, against your evil habits which lure you and which prevent you from embracing a new life. A new life is offered to you, and you are aged in your evil, suspended between the joy that accompanies the life of the Spirit and the allurements of the sensual life, you must fight inside of yourself and against yourself. But from the moment that you displease yourself, you will be united to God, and united to God, you will be ready to conquer yourself. Because he who overcomes everything will be with you. Listen to what the great apostle says. The apostle is always St. Paul. You see, the apostle, that's St. Paul. Therefore, I myself with the mind serve the law of God, but with the flesh the law of sin. That's Romans 7:25, which I cited before. Sometimes St. Augustine's citations of St. Paul are slightly different from the Vulgate. Little different, substantially the same. How do you serve? By the Spirit, this is St. Augustine, by detesting your evil life. How do you serve? By the flesh, to the extent that the suggestions and evil passions abound in you, but in uniting yourself to God, you will overcome the revolts of concupiscence. Turn to him who has lifted you up. Why does he permit this long battle in which you have to fight against yourselves? In order that you understand that this penalty comes from yourself. You are the authors of the flagellation which you feel. You are battling yourselves. God is avenging himself against him who has revolted against him by permitting that by not having desired to have peace with God, he becomes by himself the principle of war. Place your members on guard against your evil passions. Does anger rise up? Suppress it by uniting your spirit to God. It was able to rise up, but at least it will not find weapons. It wants to thrust forward with impetuosity, but it will have nothing to strike with, because you will have left it unarmed. Then this movement, without strength and without result, will be as if it never happened. St. Augustine. So you can tell from all of these quotations that Catholic spirituality involves the mortification of the flesh and concupiscence, etc. I mean, you could not deny it. Yet that's precisely what they took out in the New Mass orations, if you read Father Ciccatta's book. It's known as negative theology. This is really, really negative theology. Right? They purposely pulled all that stuff out, despising the world and St. Paul says, "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For these are contrary one to another, so that you do not the things that you would." Very famous quote of St. Paul. St. Anselm said, "The passions do not permit you to accomplish what you want. Do not permit them to accomplish what they want. In so doing, neither you nor they will do what you would. Although there are concupiscences in you, they will therefore never be victorious, because you will not consent to do what they suggest to you. But the good works of the Spirit which you accomplish cannot be brought to their term except by suffering, by fighting, by resisting concupiscence. It is impossible to accomplish them in the midst of joy." And by that he means worldly joy. Remember Monseigneur de Lassus, what separates the two cities. The city of man is enjoy. That's its motto. The city of God is merit. That's everything. So when your server at a restaurant says enjoy, you should say back merit. St. Augustine said, "Does concupiscence rise up in you? Refuse to obey it. Do not follow it. For it is guilty, it is impure, it is shameful, it will draw you away from God." The third way of defeating concupiscence is to flee. St. Peter said, "By whom he hath given us most great and precious promises, that by these you may be made partakers of the divine nature." That's the famous, that's his definition of grace, the participation or partaking in the divine nature. Flying the corruption of that concupiscence which is in the world. Flying means fleeing. It's an older word for fleeing. Fleeing the corruption of that concupiscence which is in the world. St. John, that's 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4. And St. John said, "Love not the world, nor the things which are in the world. If any man love the world, the charity of the Father is not in him." That's 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Fourth, we must call upon Jesus. St. Augustine said, "In order to overcome passion when it is disturbing your heart, it is necessary to invoke the divine power of Jesus." So the saints will tell you to say aspirations, these, little prayers when you're tempted. And as I said, if you're praying you sincerely, you're not consenting. Sincerely. Five, we must have hope in God. David says in Psalm 55, verse 5, "In God I will praise my words. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do against me." And finally, do not follow your concupiscences. St. Augustine said, "Is concupiscence rising up against you? Then rise up against it. Is it attacking you? Then attack it. Does it attack again? Then push it back again. Worry about only one thing, that it not be victorious." So that's the end of concupiscence.